This is Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily with Andrew Hustler Paterson and Michael Remis.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Huss and Remo with you for the next couple of hours. Lots to get to coming out of the weekend for the Winnipeg Jets, focusing in on the Western Conference playoff race in the upcoming week for Winnipeg in San Jose tomorrow night, and then back at home to begin a final homestand of the year Friday night against the Detroit Red Wings. Coming up on the program today, we will chop it up with Sean Reynolds of Sportsnet and our guy Jeff Hamilton from the Winnipeg Free Press, get their thoughts on where the team is at heading into these, final 8 games of the year, as well as the performance on Saturday afternoon in the loss against the Los Angeles Kings. Number of other things we'll get to coming out of the weekend as well, but as always, the focus will be on the home team, and that is the Winnipeg Jets. Do have to give a big congratulations to the Winnipeg Ice. They went back-to-back as the number 1 team in the Western Hockey League regular season and begin their playoffs on Friday against Medicine Hat, looking for a Western Hockey League championship and maybe a trip to the Memorial Cup for the CHL title. We will talk a lot of ice. We'll have one of the players on a little bit later on, and Brian Munz will join us before Friday's Game 1 of the opening round series out at the Ice Cave. And just before we bring in Michael Remis, got to give a big shout out. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but our guy, Jeff Gustafson, Gussie Outdoors, winning the Bassmaster Classic, the Super Bowl of fishing, if you will. We'll hopefully get Gussie on the program over the next few days. Great friend of the program, a regular back on the warm-up days, and just, an incredible accomplishment. And, oh, by the way, was out there hanging out with Big Buff afterwards. They like to run together and do a lot of fishing together, I understand, and Buff was there whooping it up along with all of his friends and family that were there down in Knoxville, Tennessee for the big event on the weekend. Just before I bring in Michael Remis, big shout out and thanks to the sponsors that make this show happen each and every day. Princess Auto, Coolbet Canada, Little Brown Jug, Culligan Water, Vita Health Fresh Market, Wallace & Wallace, Consolidated Supply, F Apparel, Manitoba Battery, the Nick and Nicky DQ Group, Boston Pizza, Royal Sports, and we will get to a why not question of the day. And just a quick reminder for those of you that are listening on the podcast or with us right now on YouTube, welcome everyone. Make sure you've hit that red subscribe button on YouTube. I'm throwing this link in one more time right there. Wednesday night, Sports Trivia Night, Little Brown Jug. If you haven't already, make sure to click the link, grab your tickets, and hope to see all of you out there for our second Sports Trivia Night. Spent a good portion of time on the weekend cooking up questions. We'll finish that up over the next couple days, and I hope to see you there at 7 p.m. And if you are listening on the podcast, just go to winnipegsportstalk.com. You'll see the link right at the top of the page. Click on that, reserve your seats, and we hope to see you there on Wednesday night. All right, let's do it. Michael Remis, what's going on? How was your weekend?
It was good. I could feel the snow melting, so that was good. I took in the Moose game yesterday with my son, so that was an exciting time for us. And I'm trying.
How did he make out at the game?
He's how old is he? He's 3.5. So I mean, his attention span isn't quite there, but you got to picture the Mickey Mouse right away, which was the highlight. What do we have? Some popcorn. He did enjoy when they showed like Peppa Pig, an ad for that on the Jumbotron. So he's getting there. Hockey's not quite his thing. He's more into Hot Wheels. So we did scooch over to World of Wheels before before going home. So it was a good weekend for us.
You went to the World of Wheels?
We just popped
Was
in.
Ric Flair there?
No, he had to cancel. He canceled on Friday that appearance and appearance in Indianapolis. So that was the big story. But some really cool cars, and they did have some collector Hot Wheels that he was really interested in. And then once I told him I wasn't going to spend like $20 on a Hot Wheel, he wanted to go home. So we went home and fell asleep in the car.
That's great that you had a nice weekend. Yeah, the Moose point streak ended yesterday, and that lost to Rockford, but they're still sitting pretty heading into the American Hockey League playoffs. Not quite as comfortable a situation for the Winnipeg Jets, who lost on the weekend to the Los Angeles Kings on Saturday afternoon. You know, a game, Remo, that I thought did not start well for Winnipeg. I mean, they got down early. They didn't have a shot in the better part of the first half of the first period. I did like the pushback in the second half of the first period. It seemed like some of the players on the team were, almost embarrassed with the way that team had started, and they really started pushing forward. But to be honest, I mean, the second and third period, this was it. This was an easy win for the Los Angeles Kings. And I guess if we're looking at one positive out of this, the power play finally scored. But unfortunately, it was at the end of a 5-minute major, which cost the Winnipeg Jets a good portion of Josh Morrissey's game, as he got 18 stitches after that cross-check from Elliotte. Again, what a joke. I mean, for the second time this week, a straight cross-check to the face, resulting in injury, nets a 1-game suspension. That's another story we can talk about a little bit later on. But overall, I'm not sure what you thought of the game. This was just not enough from the Winnipeg Jets to go up against a team like the LA Kings. And what is concerning, even if you are of the opinion that the Winnipeg Jets will be a playoff team, if that is the way that they're able to compete against the top teams that they'll be playing in the first round, it put it this way, it didn't instill a lot of confidence that the best was yet to come for the Winnipeg Jets, at least from where I was sitting.
Yeah, I think if you take out a couple things, you could maybe frame it like it wasn't, a terrible game. You go to Money Puck, and they had it as like a coin flip, basically, on the deserve to win-o-meter. And the deserve to win-o-meter, I just think you're seeing the same things from the Jets that we keep saying they need to fix over and over again. Getting scored on first within the first 5 minutes of a game is just, in the last 10, has just been a record on repeat. And there it was with Arvidsson with a shot off a lost faceoff, which again has been a conversation. And when you think the Jets are finally going to get back in, they do score a power play goal. They're now 1 for their last 27 in power plays, which the power play has been killing them over and over in games when they could tie or get a lead. When they need the power play to give them a boost, it really hasn't at all, and it should when you're a 5-on-4. So they go into you had a pretty good second period. You go into the third, you're ready to, start your comeback. And again, right away, off a lost D-zone faceoff, Drew Doughty shoots, and they get the 3-1 lead. And, I don't know if they sat back or, they play their tough system, and the Jets couldn't figure it out. So I think there were parts that you liked on Saturday's game, but, I mean, when you go down, if 5 minutes in every single game, and you don't score in your power play, you're not going to win a lot of games. And they did not win. And I mean, the other story is their top players, they're not getting anything from them. Dubois scored, broke his scoreless streak, but Mark Scheifele, you've talked about it, 0 shots. He's playing all his power play time. And
he's on a milk carton right now.
Blake Wheeler, he's not scoring, and Kyle Connor's got 1 in the last, however many it is. So your top players aren't being your top players right now. And again, you're not going to win like that. So, I mean, there's some stuff to like, but it's kind of just, I would say it was about what I expected from the Jets against the LA Kings, and they had opportunities and weren't able to capitalize.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Nashville lost, but Calgary won. So the Jets technically, as we get into this week, do have full control of their own destiny. The game in hand that Nashville had, well, they had 3, but were 5 back, has been lost. So, I mean, if the Jets are able to take care of their own business, they will be a playoff team. That being said, there's a lot of work to left be done. And when you look at the teams coming in next week, including the New Jersey Devils and the Calgary Flames and the Nashville Predators, no easy games on the sked. But like I said last week, the focus needed to be on these last week and this week to put the Jets into a position where maybe they had the opportunity to give Connor Hellebuyck a night off and to clinch this spot earlier than game 81 or game 82. By the way, those games are very tough games, at least on the schedule, at Minnesota and at Colorado to end the season. They got the 2 wins they had to have last week against the Arizona Coyotes and the Anaheim Ducks. I think it was quite clear that of the next 5 games, the game on Saturday was the biggest challenge for them. But must win, can't lose, however you want to put it up tomorrow. That is certainly the case against the San Jose Sharks. And then this team's going to need to come back. A Friday night game at home against the Detroit Red Wings. Andrew Kopp's return. Definitely going to need to get a good start to that homestand right now because the benefit is there is a little bit of extra rest right now. We heard Bones talk about that and why they weren't concerned about running Connor Hellebuyck night after night right now. But as I said, Calgary's final 7 games of the year are 6 teams that are not going to the playoffs and the Winnipeg Jets a game here. So there is still lots of work to do for Winnipeg. And to be honest, they're going to need to be better than they were against the LA Kings if they do want to get that done. Let's hear a little bit of what Bones had to say after the game. And we'll start it off with his comments on the power play, which finally scored a goal after seemingly going forever without really being able to get much done. It took a while on a 5-minute power play, but they did get a goal. Here's what Bones had to say about the power play contributing.
Still, at least we were shooting the puck today. We took a lot more shots. We had 3 one-timers in a row that missed the net, so it starts with that. Just put it on the net. So we're setting it up and we're getting the shot we want, and then we miss the net. So at least we put more pucks toward the net tonight, and it's up to the players got to put it on the net. It's as simple as that.
All right, there was a Rick Bowness. They did actually, I believe, miss the net like 18 times or so. I mean, I guess they're shooting more, but need to maybe crank up that accuracy a little bit if you want to have a little bit more impact on the scoreboard. As you mentioned, Remis, I mean, the game did not start well. I mean, Mark Scheifele beaten cleanly on a draw that was in the back of the net before you knew it. Bones was asked about another early goal against after a D-zone draw that didn't go his team's way.
Well, it's against the way they play, the worst thing you can do is give them the lead, which we did right off the bat by losing that face-off. That play happened so fast. It was tough for anyone to react. We lost it that clean. But the second half of the first period, we started taking it to them. We needed to score so we could even this thing out. But again, they get that power play goal. And the way they play, they're just going to sit back on it and force you to dump it in and bump it back and get it out. And we weren't getting our second guy in on that forecheck. So again, the worst thing you can do is give them a lead, and we did.
Pretty accurate from Bones. And I think, and that was sort of my feeling in the second and third period, that, the Kings were just in total control of that game. And they sat there in the neutral zone with that 1-3-1. They didn't allow the Winnipeg Jets to carry it in. They forced them to dump it in. And whether it was, Bones' thoughts on not having that second guy in there, or the Jets just maybe being a step slower than the Kings or not able to win those individual battles, it did not really generate much. I mean, the high danger scoring chances for the game said that the Jets had 4 in the first period. And I certainly think that the second half of the first period was the best 10 minutes they played in the entire game. But they were really frustrated. And this kind of goes back to my theory that it just did seem like a pretty easy game for the Kings. The minute they got that 2-goal lead, they were able to basically sit back, and the Jets did not have very many answers for them. And games like this, Reem, it will see this in the playoffs as well, where you have to go and earn your opportunities, earn your scoring chances. And it's a matter of will. It's a matter of winning battles. And first of all, you got to be in the battle. And unfortunately, too many of the Winnipeg Jets weren't in the battle on Saturday afternoon in LA.
Yeah, I don't know if they were enjoying too much of the LA sun. I was actually surprised to see there's practicing in LA today at 12. So they've been there since after Thursday's game against the Ducks. Well, I guess I don't even know if they would have stayed close because they're really close. They're still been in that LA region.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they've been in the same hotel the whole time.
But they've been, look, they came out with a sleepy start, 11 shots. Before, they had 10 shots, the Kings, before the Jets got one. It was 11-1 the shots, but they really did pick it up in that second half of the first period. And that was the difference, giving up the quick goal. Again, it's just like we're saying the same stuff over and over again. The quick goal, you don't get anything from the power play. You had a nice second period, but another quick goal in the third period, and the game's done. You can't come back from that. Korpisalo was solid for them, gave them the goaltending that they've needed. I mean, it didn't have to be spectacular, but again, you kind of, I don't want to say shoot yourself in the foot, but you give up these goals off these face-offs for 5 minutes, minutes into the period. You're just really putting yourself in a tough position there. And again, the power play has had chance after chance in games over the last 2 months to get help them, and it really hasn't, which is too bad.
Well, at least the drought is over. Maybe that bodes well for them going into San Jose. But I know many other markets and individuals and insiders are talking a little bit more about the Jets and the future of the core. The biggest reason for that is that it's so glaring that they're not getting enough from their top players right now. And Mike asked Bones after the game on Saturday, what he thinks about his top players and if he's getting enough from his difference makers.
Are you getting enough from your top-end guys? A guy like Mark didn't have a shot on net tonight. I mean, not to single one guy out, but do you need more from your guys?
The top guys, yeah, well, they've got to score. We need some goals from them, and yeah.
Is that just
that's stating the obvious?
Yeah.
So,
is that just a case of other teams are doing a good job of maybe
fight through it? Whatever they throw at you, fight through it.
Interesting comment from Rick Monis there. And again, if you're listening on the podcast, you couldn't really see, the body language, but I don't know. I took that he's sort of biting his lip. It would be fascinating to be sitting around in the coach's room when he and Brad Lauer and Scott Arniel talk about these games afterwards, because I think it might be a little bit more emphatic of what he just had to say, that they need more and these guys need to generate something and they need to score goals. And we spent so much time talking about Mark Scheifele, especially since he was benched in the Carolina game. I mean, worst case scenario for the way that he's responded to that challenge from the coaching staff. And no shots on goal, a -2. You could pretty much take a clip from the last couple of weeks at any point. This team's going nowhere if they don't get a hell of a lot better from Mark Scheifele right now. And it's got to be really concerning for everyone in that dressing room, certainly in the organization. And it, of course, Remo has now started some people outside the market, the likes of Elliotte, Friedman, talking about what we've been talking for a number of weeks here, and frankly, dating back to last season on this show, that this core is pretty much done. And we're expecting some major changes regardless of what happens over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's such an interesting time for the Jets because they are in a playoff spot and they kind of are where we thought they would be, coming into the season. But the way they've got there is just so confusing. Where you have this hot start, you're the top team in the Western Conference, and now over the last 2 months they've been one of the worst teams in the NHL, and they went back with the same group as last year. They retooled the bottom six a little, but for the most part, it's a lot of the same guys who are playing major roles for the team. And it feels like we're in last season. I'm going to be putting out the same type of videos this summer. And you look at the contracts with Scheifele entering his final year, Dubois and RFA again in his final year of team control, Wheeler, Hellebuck. This would be a time where you can make major changes. And I'm seeing comments in chat and comments on YouTube after that. People know that if this team gets in the playoffs, I mean, if you go up against Colorado or Vegas, it's going to be very hard, and you're probably going to get, eliminated.
It might be
early.
brief.
Yeah, it's going to be a brief stay, sure. And I think people want to see changes, and they want to see, I think the group has gotten stale to some, and you kind of know what you're going to get. And we've realized that this isn't the Stanley Cup contender maybe we thought it was halfway through the season, and they are who they've been, or they are who we thought they were, to quote Dennis Green. So real interesting time, and it does kind of feels a bit like last year, like we're going to the end, although there may be a brief stay in the playoffs, or it could be extended if you get some really strong play from Connor Hellebuyck, or your top guys finally score. You're not relying on Adam Lowry and Morgan Barron to score all the big goals. And I think that's the biggest thing. Where's Connor been? Dubois hasn't had, he had that hot start. He's not scoring. Mark Scheifele, we've talked about. Blake Wheeler as well hasn't been the same since he made the ultimate sacrifice for the team. And when you're not getting your top performances from top players, it's really hard to win.
Yeah, listen, I know there was a lot of talk about Wheeler. I think you're burying the lead if we're focusing on Blake at this point. He's at the end of the run. We can talk about the contract that he was given, and I think everyone knew that when that thing was signed, at the end of it, it probably wouldn't be great value for what the team is giving him. But I'll say this about Blake: I thought that he really handled everything early on in the season with taking the captaincy away from him very well. He still has 50 points on the season. But I don't think there's any way you can watch him play right now and not realize that he is not even close to the player that he was even in the first half of the season. Whether this is still, things that he's dealing with from that injury, or something else, just the law of diminishing returns, I'm not sure. But we're foolish if we're kind of looking at Blake Wheeler to be the guy at this point in his career that's going to be the driver for the Winnipeg Jets.
I would agree with you, but I'll say he's given time on the top. He's been a top 6 player. He's given time on the number 1 power play, and the number 1 power play hasn't scored. They've scored 1 goal in the last 27 times. So
he's not on it anymore. He's not on it anymore. But I agree with you. And I said last week, I said I would wanted to see Morgan Barron up there. Mm-hmm. For sure. But as I say, if you spend too much time talking about Blake Wheeler, you're ignoring the biggest problem right now, and it has been the disappearing act of Mark Scheifele. And Reem, you mentioned about things kind of feeling like last year for some people. To me, it starts right there. Even at the end of the season, there were a whole bunch of players on this team last year that were saying the things that were obvious to everyone that needed to be said. And then we heard what Mark had to say, which was diametrically opposed to the accountability that many other people had taken. And now, as I said, this has just been a disappearing act. This guy has 38 goals this season and has been an absolute non-factor down the stretch in the most important time of the year. And, I'll look forward to hearing what Sean has to say and what Jeff has to say. But all of these revelations, we'll hear from Elliotte Friedman in a minute, and some of the other people around the league that are now saying, "Oh, what's going on in Winnipeg right now?" It's blaringly obvious to anyone that has followed this club that something's up with Mark Scheifele. You can say that he's checked out. You can say that whatever. The bottom line is he's not getting it done right now. He's still such an important player. He played 19 minutes in that game on Saturday, and we're at a point right now where, I think Rick Bowness has very limited options right now because there isn't a guy you can just throw in and take that spot. If all of a sudden you diminish that line's ice time or change it up, do you want to do that as well to Nikolai Ehlers? I think there's certainly an argument that Wheeler and Scheifele should be playing less minutes right now. Who are going to be the guys that can pick up that spot? And the problem is there's not the guys that can pick up that offense. One guy that, certainly is a central figure as well, who was recently injured, came back and did score on the weekend, is Pierre-Luc Dubois. And just before we bring in Sean Reynolds, there's a couple of really interesting quotes from Pierre-Luc Dubois. And maybe we'll just go to grab up number 9, Remo, because and I'm interested to get Sean's take on this because, of course, we played the clip last year where Sean said, to Pierre-Luc Dubois, he seemed almost distracted with some of the lines of questioning. Dubois had a pretty interesting answer about the frustration of he and his team come from the weekend. This is how it sounded.
Yeah, we all want to win. I think everybody is frustrated right now. Everybody wants to win. It's the time of year where you can't drop too many points. this is a big game for us against a really good team, but against potentially a playoff matchup, potentially down the road. Who knows? So it's a big game for us to see where we're at, and I understand you can't win them all, but at this point of the year we have to try, and we have to bring our A game every night. And we did some good things tonight, but we can do a lot better these next couple games.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it as much about what LA was doing, or do you feel that you guys maybe came up short in some areas?
I mean, they have their systems, they have what they do, they have their identity. But at this time of year, it's really about how your team's playing and how we're playing, and we know we can do a lot better. We knew what they were going to do tonight. We knew how they were going to play. I hadn't played since Monday, so we knew they were going to come out and have good legs. And in the neutral zone, we didn't quite crack the code. And I think that's at the end of the day, that's it limited our offense on the rush, limited our offensive time in the O-zone. That's what really hurt us, I think.
All right, so there's Pierre-Luc Dubois. We'll have a little bit more from the Jets later on. We will have a couple of clips from 32 Thoughts of Elliotte Friedman discussing sort of the future of the Winnipeg Jets core. But we're going to get to Sean Reynolds coming up in just a second. Folks, if you need a battery for your car, your truck, or even that summer toy you're working on in this winter that never seems to end, Manitoba Battery wants you to know they're the most convenient and well-priced option in the city. So convenient, in fact, that you can put in the call or an email order for your new battery around lunchtime or even the start of Winnipeg Sports Talk, and it will be sitting on your doorstep in 2 to 4 hours for less money than you'd spend anywhere else in Winnipeg on the same battery. Shopping local, saving time and money. It is that easy. No more fighting for a parking spot with those crazies at Costco. No more waiting in line at Canadian Tire or spending money on a battery at the big box stores. Let Manitoba Battery bring that battery to you while you focus and spend time on more important things. Give them a phone call at 783-8787, or you can order online at manitobabattery.com. It's that simple. And of course, if you do have the opportunity, pop down and see Donnie and his great staff at 1026 Logan Avenue. And again, manitobabattery.com. Rumor is that the snow will melt in a couple weeks, and we'll be maybe getting onto a golf course. I know golf courses around the province are getting ready for the season, and of course our friends at Consolidated Supply are a huge part of that, with the best irrigation products and solutions around, not to mention artificial turf as well. It can be more than just for golf courses. How about you and your property? If you do have irrigation needs that you're looking to get on this spring and summer, talk to them about it. Maybe thinking about some artificial turf or a dream putting green in your backyard. Consolidated Supplies got it for you. And while you're thinking about that backyard, check out their great selection of spas and hot tubs, as well as amazing outdoor kitchen options, in addition to being the leader in small engine parts and small engine repair. Consolidated Supply. Pop down and see Joe Spicy and the gang at 1395 Niagara Road East, open to the public. And of course, you can also check everything that they've got going on online at cte.ca. One more week in March. Get those nominations in for our Wallace & Wallace Community Hero along with Josh Morrissey. Send us an email to unsunghero@winnipegsportstalk.com. Let us know about that person in your life or your community that's helping others through extended volunteer work, charity work, or maybe being that person either organizing or spending time helping their neighbors when in need. Send us that email, unsunghero@winnipegsportstalk.com. We'll have an autographed Josh Morrissey jersey for the Unsung Hero for March, and Wallace & Wallace will make a $500 donation to the Dream Factory in the name of the Winnipeg Sports Talk listener who nominated the winner, and that will be matched by Josh and Margot Morrissey. And just before we bring in Rennie, if you're looking for great prices on natural and organic supplements, beauty products, and groceries, you need to pop by one of 7 Vita Health Fresh Market stores or online at myvita.ca, also carrying Winnipeg's largest assortment of local products too. With spring allegedly just around the corner, get ready for it with Ultimate Male Energy, guys. Formulated specifically for men over 35, Ultimate Male Energy is designed to help improve testosterone production, reduce excess body fat, build muscle tissue, maintain prostate health, and more. It's on sale today at Vita Health. Vita Health Fresh Market, empowering people to lead healthy lives. 7 Winnipeg locations, including the newest store in Linden Ridge, and online at myvita.ca. All right, let's welcome him in. It was it wasn't a one-man show, but a one-man hosting gig on the weekend because Sean Reynolds is welcoming a bunch of the K&R gang down to Trans-Canada Breweries on the weekend. And good thing everyone had the great pizzas and beers and camaraderie, because I'm not sure everyone would have been that pleased with the game. Rennie, what's up? How was your weekend?
Oh, great weekend. The big shout out and thanks to the folks at TCB for hosting us. And you know this because a lot of the people that we've hosted have also joined you for your trivia nights and stuff like that. There's nothing like getting to, interact with the people that, are on the other side of these programs and consuming these programs. The opportunity to meet and greet with those people and get to know them a little better has been probably the funnest part of doing this whole podcast thing. So it was a great weekend in that regard.
Sean, it's funny. I mean, I sometimes am accused, and I'll own it, of being, relentlessly positive at times. It has been very difficult to be that lately. I'll be honest, I was taken aback by, you were the one with the ray of sunshine from Saturday's game. I mean, fill us in on why we shouldn't be as disappointed as many were with the way the Jets played in LA. You had a little bit of a different look at it.
Yeah. So, I'm actually surprised people are as down as they are. I know that over the years, I think I've probably got a little bit of of a reputation as being the storm clouds guy. I had joked because someone had talked about it and I'd said, I never thought that I would be the optimistic one in the relationship between Ken and I. That definitely was the case after that game. I think a lot of people are confusing my take with saying hey, everything's fine where the Jets are. I'm not saying that one bit. What I am saying is that you have to take into account where the Jets have been, how bad their game has been over the last 6 to 8 weeks. And to me, I think this is being a realist in this situation, is taking a look at where the Jets have been and what they are going to need to do to build their game back up to being a competitive team in the playoffs. Now, by no means am I taking a look at that game against LA and saying, they've arrived, the Winnipeg Jets are back. Here's the team that's going to carry you to the Stanley Cup final. There's no way that I'm saying that. What I am saying, though, and I'll repeat it again, I think the Jets are making the playoffs because it's just too hard for the other teams to get there. People still worry about the Nashville Predators. I'd said this before, about a week ago or a little over a week ago, things were going to change for the Nashville Predators. They were red hot and doing great, but they have the hardest schedule down the stretch. And since that schedule turned and they started playing hard teams, they've lost 4 of their last 6 games. That's not how they are going to get back over and above the Winnipeg Jets. And I'm telling you right now, expect that to continue because they've got an extremely hard schedule. So they're going to lose those games against really, really good teams. So I don't see them as being a concern. Calgary remains a concern, but Calgary is also a team that every time you look at them and think they've got things turned around, they'll turn around and show you exactly why they're where they are. So to me, this is about the Winnipeg Jets getting their game from where it's been, which I think was rock bottom a little while ago, to trying to build it back to some kind of semblance of what they were capable of doing in the playoffs, or what they are capable of doing in the playoffs. So I don't think this is a flip switching thing. Everyone is always asking me, what's wrong with the Winnipeg Jets? What do they got to do to turn this around? Everyone thinks that the Jets are just going to flip, turn it on, and Mark Scheifele is going to be right back at his game, and Kyle Connor is going to be right back at his game. That's not how it happens. It's going to be a slow progression. So the reason that I take a look at that Kings game and I think, you know what, it's not so bad for the Winnipeg Jets is because I do think throughout that game there were signs. Now, starting the game, getting outshot 12-0, yeah, that's a very good indication of where this team has been and a lot of the problems that they have and still continue to have going forward. But at the times where they got engaged in that game, they looked like a team that not only was hanging with the LA Kings, but at points of the game, pushing the pace and controlling the pace against the Kings. So if I'm Rick Bowness and I'm the rest of the Winnipeg Jets, I say I take a look at a team like the LA Kings, who I personally believe are firing on all cylinders and ready to go and going to be a problem and a handful for everybody in the West in the Western Conference playoffs this year. But the fact that they found stretches of that game where they looked like they belonged, I think is a good sign, because the Jets for a long time have not looked like they've belonged with that caliber of team. And the wins that they've been getting have been tight games over poor teams, less than playoff caliber teams. And so this is not me saying, hey, the Winnipeg Jets have arrived, bring on the playoffs. This is me saying, okay, there's stuff that you can take out of that game against the LA Kings and have hope that you can build on going forward. And they've got 8 games to start building and get to some kind of a semblance of a playoff game. I just think that there were parts of that game that suggest a step forward in which the Jets can take to continue building as they go forward.
Well, they certainly did answer after that terrible first opening 10 minutes of the game. And I thought the second 10 minutes of the first period was their best, where they were certainly pushing the pace. I mean, they were getting pucks on net. It sounded like they were maybe listening to a little bit more what the coaches were wanting. What was disappointing, though, was that, in the second and third periods, the LA Kings with a lead, we knew exactly what they were doing. They were sitting there back in the neutral zone. They were making it tough to carry the puck in, and the Jets really had no answer for that. And we played that clip of Bones mentioning that, they got the dumps in. They weren't getting a second guy in, and more often than not, it was popping in. The Kings would get the puck back, and it would come out. And the ability to battle through that is, frankly, what you need to do to be a playoff team, to do anything in the playoffs, and that wasn't there. But that's a kind of overall, it was a bit structural, and listen, that's a big question mark for the Winnipeg Jets when they're in those situations going forward. But to me, Sean, and this is not anything new, this all starts off with the top players on the club. And I mean, it's impossible not to start this conversation without talking about Mark Scheifele.
Yeah.
I mean, Scheifele has absolutely disappeared since he was benched in that game against Carolina. As I mentioned at the start of the show, this was a real challenge from the coaching staff to some of their top players. And the response from one of, if not their most important offensive player, has frankly been worst case scenario from where I'm sitting. What do you make of the situation with Scheifele? I mean, another 19 minutes on the ice, no shots on goal, -2. This team's going nowhere if they don't get a better performance out of Mark Scheifele. And I would have taken that as a positive if he looked a little more energized and was a little more there. He wasn't from where I was sitting on Saturday.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna pause on the Scheifele thing, and I just want to address what you were talking about before that. About we knew exactly what the LA Kings were doing at that point of the game, and the Jets really couldn't get a push. That's what the LA Kings look like if you give them a lead. So the cardinal sin here is the Jets weren't ready to play in that game and spotted them a lead and put themselves behind. And it's really been the cardinal sin of the Jets for a long time now. We've seen them, the problems that they've had getting the first goal in the game and constantly playing from behind. It's harder to play from behind at this time of year than it is at the beginning of the year. But I'm telling you right now, what you should know about the LA Kings is if you're the Edmonton Oilers, if you're the Colorado Avalanche, if you're the Dallas Stars, and you think that you're going to go out and spot a team like LA a lead and then be able to just overwhelm their defensive game when it comes time to score your way back into a game and win the game. Like, if that's not the Winnipeg Jets, if that's any of those other teams that I just mentioned, and it's a playoff game, they're probably going to lose that game to the LA Kings. So I think the Jets pushed, but had already put themselves behind the 8 ball. And that's one of the things that we're talking about in this team trying to get better along the way here is you can't show up late in a game like that against a team like that. And that's one of the things that's really having the Jets shoot themselves in the foot. It's part of them trying to figure out their game and get it right. So that's one of the lessons that they learn and take away from that. Most other teams would have looked exactly the same as the Winnipeg Jets did if they would have spotted that lead to a team like LA that can shut it down. So I just wanted to address that and say that I don't necessarily take that as a sign of the Jets' failure to play their way back into that game. Their failure was that they came in against a strong team and didn't match their strength from the drop of the first puck. The Scheifele thing, like what a head scratcher this is here. And you talked about it. His game has not been right since he was benched at one point. This to me is a learning curve for a first-year coach for Rick Bowness that I don't think that he saw this coming. And we've had this conversation on our show, and I think you guys have had it on yours, but I truly believe that Rick Bowness is running into things with this Winnipeg Jets team that he hasn't run into through the entirety of his career behind an NHL bench. And Huss, that is saying something. And so we go back to the things that we saw from this team under, Dave Lowry and Paul Maurice and all these years. And I think there were times, I'm sure you had the conversation on your show, I know we had it on ours, why a player like Mark Scheifele or Blake Wheeler or some of the top players on this team weren't getting benched for some of the lack of effort that we've seen from them over the years. Because this isn't a new problem, what we're seeing right now. This is something that this team has dealt with for a number of years. And maybe this is why we're seeing Paul Maurice acted the way that he did, where he wouldn't bench those players, where he wouldn't take them and have them sit down and let the other guys play. The fact of the matter is, Rick Bowness has a very finite amount of time to figure this out. And throughout the process of trying to figure out how to get Mark Scheifele motivated, and I think that it's obviously Mark Scheifele is one of the players he was talking about when he had that conversation with, us journalists, but Scott Billick and I were kind of pushing the questions on that day where he came out and said the idea of needing to motivate this team. These are men who are on their way to their 30s. They shouldn't need motivating. I think it blows Rick Bowness's mind that he found out this late in the season that these players would need motivating down the stretch. I think it's absolutely blowing his mind. So one of the things that he tried to do in that situation is have Mark Scheifele take a seat, make a very public point about that. And we see now probably why for all those years, Paul Maurice never went and used that tool with Mark Scheifele, because this is the response that he's getting from a player who publicly has not responded well to being called out by his coach. A guy like Nino Niederreiter came out, said, you know what, we deserved it, and turned around and pushed forward. Mark Scheifele hasn't got past that yet. And this is the tricky part, and the part I talk about the learning curve of a first-year coach. I don't think Rick Bowness saw this coming. I don't think he saw this response from Mark Scheifele. And in fairness to Mark Scheifele, as long as he's played in his career, because he never had a coach that put him through this in 2016 or 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 or 21, when probably Mark Scheifele should have had these kind of messages sent to him back in those days and then learned at that time how to respond to it. Mark Scheifele, this late in his career, is trying to figure out his way through something that has clearly derailed him. Like, Mark Scheifele is not choosing not to play. He's not choosing to not be a good player in this moment right now. Mark Scheifele met a challenge that he has not seen in his career because his coaches before this never put him through that challenge, and he hasn't responded well, and he looks lost. And so this is the risk of a coach like Rick Bowness to bench a player like Mark Scheifele, but he probably wouldn't have seen it as a risk because he probably said, I've done this to really good star players throughout my entire career, and they've responded in this way, and I expect a star player to respond like this. Mark Scheifele hasn't responded to it, and I would argue it's because he's never faced this challenge before. It's his first time really facing this challenge with the pressure on. And here we are, a player who doesn't know how to figure his way out of it, a coach that's trying to coach that player's way through it, to motivate that player's way through it. And this is, I think, one of those things that in this organization for years is a problem that has been pushed to the next day, to the next day, to the next day. And the day finally arrived, and seeing as they're heading into the playoffs, it couldn't have arrived at a worse time.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? There was a few times. I mean, obviously, Maurice famously benching him on Hockey Night in Canada in Toronto was sort of a big move by Paul, but that wasn't something we saw very often. I mean, Dave Lowry tried everything at the end of last season, but I think we saw by the end of what he had to say at the end of the year, that was not a great situation. I just can't understand it. I mean, a player that has had 38 goals on the season was having such a great year, to be so thrown off course at a time like this when any professional player knows what's on the line right now, Sean. And I mean, we've seen the answers when you and Scott were talking to Bones last week about motivation and his comment, I mean, this is what we're dealing with here, and some of his exasperation after the game on being asked about his top players. I mean, unfortunately, it's a huge indictment of, one of the guys that is supposed to be your leaders right now. But it's pretty hard to move on to anywhere else on the lineup when your number one center, your most important offensive player, is completely missing in action, but still playing significant minutes right now. And I don't want to quote this number. We've talked a lot about the Jets giving up the first goal early. It's almost always been when 55's line is on. He was like at a plus 13, I think, earlier on in the season. And right now, minus 18. I mean, things are just cratering right now when he's on the ice. And that is not the way that it's been. It's not the way that it should be. And to be honest, it is the most puzzling thing I can remember seeing in a long, long time. But it doesn't bode well for the Winnipeg Jets if they expect to make the playoffs unless they get a hell of a lot more from a guy that has been a real leader and is the offensive cog up front.
Well, I want to make things clear. I'm not for a second saying Mark Scheifele doesn't own a part of this. When it comes down to it, Mark Scheifele is a man who gets paid a lot of money to play a game and to produce results. And in the end, it's incumbent upon him to do this. The crazy part of what we're talking about here, though, is like, we've talked about the Jets culture for years. And this, to me, is just a manifestation of the culture that's plagued this team for years. And the response that we're seeing from this is the response of that culture to a different challenge that it has not seen before from a coach like Rick Bowness, who's trying different things that other coaches who were, complicit in creating the culture that we are talking about and that is so puzzling did not try over that stretch. Let's be clear and upfront here. If there's two players on the Winnipeg Jets that should be dragging this team out of the funk that they're in with their play, it should be Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele. Like, these should be the two players at the very center, given the idea that Blake Wheeler is the elder statesman that was a captain on this team for years upon years upon years, who is given all kinds of opportunity by this organization to be the man over these years. And Mark Scheifele, I put him right there in that category. Those two players are 1A and 1B, the amount of money they get paid to play the game, the responsibilities that has been handed over to them, the leash that they have been given over the years. These should be the two players that at this point know more than anyone else how to respond and how to get the team out of this. It is because of the fact that they look to be the two players most lost by this. And it is because of the fact that you've got the most experienced coach in the history of the NHL who clearly looks befuddled and baffled by the response that we're seeing here. It is because of this that I say that this is a manifestation of the culture that has carried on in this organization and with this team for years. It is not as simple as pointing the finger at Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler and saying, why aren't these players going? It's how these players were developed within this organization, how they were treated, how they have now responded, has everything to do with the fact that these two players are the core Winnipeg Jets players. Everything Mark Scheifele knows about being a pro, he knows as the result of growing up and being a part of the Winnipeg Jets organization. So I will say this, and I will say this as loud as I possibly can. The idea that Mark Scheifele solely carries the load for what is happening here right now with his game, I say that would be ignoring all the things that led him to this point and the way that this organization treated him and built him along the way. But at the same time, I will say this, it is also up to Mark Scheifele as a player to figure this out, to be a pro and to go out and do what he needs to do to make sure that he is pulling as hard as he can on the rope for the Winnipeg Jets. I just think that it's very easy for everyone to just turn and point the finger at a guy like Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler and say, these guys aren't going and this is the problem and they haven't responded since this happened. This team And the question that everyone is always asking, what is wrong with these guys? What is happening with that room? Questions that have been asked over and over and over, time and time again throughout the years with this team, with this group, is manifesting itself with the two most important players in this organization's history, in 2.0's history. And that's what we're seeing at this moment.
Well, let me ask you this. Why do you think this is happening now? Because it certainly wasn't happening in the first half of the season. I mean, Mark Scheifele is still on pace to maybe have his best goal-scoring season ever. And listen, I mentioned this earlier, but if you missed it, I'll reset this. I mean, I don't spend as much time talking about Blake Wheeler just because, I mean, this is the law of diminishing returns right in our face.
Yeah,
Wheeler's got 50
it's the
points
pass that everyone's getting. It's the pass, but...
I mean, listen, Wheeler's got 50 points. If you had told me at the start of the year Wheeler would have 50 points in 65 games, I would have taken that in a heartbeat.
Okay, hold on. But Blake Wheeler is the guy who comes out and says and challenges reporters when people say, wow, things are going so good for you. And he says, what's changed? So why does Blake Wheeler get the credit when things are going well and then get to escape the criticism when things aren't going well?
I just think we're burying the lead if we're spending too much time talking. Well, exactly that. And to be honest, I think that he's been a very different player since the injury. I mean, I think that Blake Wheeler, since coming back, has not looked anything like the Blake Wheeler that frankly was quite energized and pretty productive up until he got hurt. But I mean, Scheifele's totally different. He's been in the lineup the entire time. He was feeling the benefits of the new attitude and everything around it. We all talk about the pledge. I mean, I at least see Dubois and Ehlers and some of the other guys that we've been talking about, Kyle Connor, saying that, like, you can see that they are really doing everything they can. It might not work, but they're coming to work and they are showing that they are engaged. I mean, Scheifele, this is a different player we're looking at right now, and it's gotten way worse in the past 2 weeks. And listen, I don't disagree at all with what you've said about kind of how this got created over a number of years, the way they were used. The word coddled often comes out when you're talking to people. But as far as right now, Sean, you know, with this 2 weeks left in the regular season, and looking at the Jets holding on to a playoff spot by 4 points over the Calgary Flames, I mean, in the short term, what can happen? Like, I'm not sure there's anything else Rick Bowness can do. I kind of figured that those things, so, I mean, at a certain point, it ends up, you can either just not play them, which...
Well, realistically, he can't do that. Realistically, he cannot do that. No. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. You have to live with it. And what you are leading it to is that the one person who can solve this problem is Mark Scheifele. And I agree with you 1,000%. I agree with you 1,000%. What I don't agree with is the idea that at a time where Mark Scheifele and all the things you said about like the coddling and the things that happened over the years that have led to Mark Scheifele being the kind of player he is, to kind of have everybody step out of the spotlight and leave Mark Scheifele all alone in the spotlight when he's a monster of the organization's making, to totally recede and leave him to be the only person to take the heat, I think is wrong. I think it's a wrong for fans to do that. I think it's wrong for his teammates to do it. I think it's wrong for the organization to do that. Even if Mark Scheifele is the person most responsible for getting him to where he needs to go. So that's what I'm saying is when I think the fingers are just being pointed a little too clearly in one direction right now, where there's a lot of places they can go. But I agree with you 1,000%. This problem is only going to get solved if Mark Scheifele solves it. And it's incumbent on him in the end to solve that problem. He's got to get going. He's got to do that. You asked me why it's happening at this stage. I think why it's happening is because all the things that the Winnipeg Jets, I think over the years, and we've talked about this since 2018-19, the Winnipeg Jets look phenomenal at some point of the season, then they tail off and they start falling away. I think the issue with the Jets has always been that they can sustain a certain kind of game that their coaches say will give them success for a certain amount of time, but then they always go and they revert back to a specific kind of game. You've heard me talk about it before. I call it snake charmer offense. I think when you see Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele get on the ice together and they're doing those curl backs and they're taking off to the boards and they're saucing passes from one side of the boards to the other side of the boards. When they score like that, it looks gorgeous. But to me, that is a sign that they're playing a style of game that disappears and is not successful in the playoffs, but it's what they always revert to. And so why I think it's happening now is because at the beginning of the year, they were bought into Rick Bowness's system, but you knew at some point that they were going to revert to what they did because that's what they've done every year. And the challenge was going to become when they reverted to that game, how did Rick Bowness respond to it? And I think Rick Bowness thought it was going to be easy. I'm just going to tell these guys, I'm going to snap them back in. We're going to take them into video sessions. We're going to hammer home they need to get back to this. And he hasn't been able to get the team back to playing the way he wanted them to play. And that's what was baffling, because the fight was never to get Mark Scheifele to play a specific game that you wanted him to play. And I would throw Blake Wheeler in this. And to a degree, I would throw players like Kyle Connor into this. The challenge was never to get them to play a certain kind of game. It was to keep them playing that kind of game and not reverting back to the thing that this team always likes to revert back to and has been doing since 2018, 2019. And so the challenge it would have been so much easier, Huss, if this challenge would have come at the beginning of the year rather than at the end of the year. But the timing of this coming to a head couldn't be worse, but no one should be surprised that this challenge came, because it's the same challenge every team has been facing before, every coaching staff has faced before this, and no coaching staff has found a solution to. Bowness is in the middle of trying everything he can to get there. It looks like Scheifele is, and I would argue Blake Wheeler are the last holdouts in him trying to get them back to what he needs them to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that at all, Sean. I mean, just think about this last couple of weeks. I mean, since the benching, we've seen, I think Kyle Connor being moved off that line was a huge weight off him. And the minute we saw him out with Pierre-Luc Dubois, bang, he scores, he's involved. I think Nikolai Ehlers, for those top players, has been one guy that at least is showing you that he cares every night. I mean, taking that beating from Braden Shen, I mean, he's done those things. And Dubois, listen, I mean, sometimes I think Dubois can be, an elite player in the National Hockey League, and sometimes I'm wondering, what he's thinking out there. His consistency leaves something to be desired. Yes. However, over this last little while, since he's come back from being injured, we've certainly have seen an engaged Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, Scheifele's not even showing up for these games. And again, to your point, like, what is Rick Bowness going to do? I mean, you can't just take your top line and basically say, you guys are sitting down for another couple periods. You do it once to try to get that response. And unfortunately, it has created the opposite response right now. And I mean, with so little time left in it, I mean, maybe this team sneaks into the playoffs, and maybe just the buzz of playoff hockey can bring out the best in Mark Scheifele. Let's face it, the best we've ever seen him was in the 2018 playoffs when he almost single-handedly, I shouldn't say single-handedly, it was a great team, but he was that guy. 14 goals in 17 games. I mean, he did everything for the club. Maybe that can get them back, but it's really hard to imagine things changing significantly, whether they make the playoffs or not make the playoffs, if they can't get more out of a guy that is so important. I mean, Connor Hellebuck's there, Josh Morrissey's there. We've talked about some of the response from some of the other players that we just mentioned. The one thing that hasn't happened is getting anything from 55 and 26 as well. The thing with Blake Wheeler is, I mean, as I say, we've seen the law of diminishing returns. I'm not sure how much there is left for him to give. There's way more for Mark Scheifele right now, which brings us to this. And we're going to play these comments from Elliotte Friedman a little bit later on. But we're now hearing people outside of the market talking about the same things that we've been talking about for quite a while.
We knew they'd get here eventually.
Exactly. But regardless of whether this team, gets in and is out in the first period, I mean, let's say barring some sort of miracle turnaround and run, what happens once this season is over? I mean, you follow this team as close as anyone. I mean, how significant do you think these changes will be? And will this be basically a complete reset, or blow it up, if you will, on the entire core? Because we're talking about Mark Scheifele. Pierre-Luc Dubois apparently has one foot out the door. I mean, this team was built around having that strength down center ice, and that completely changes if those guys aren't playing or are gone.
Yeah, so I've said this since before the trade deadline. I think this is obviously happening. I went after I'd been saying this for a while. I noticed Darren Dreger had started saying something similar along these lines, which I think says quite a bit. With so many players on expiring contracts and all those contracts ending next year, Pierre-Luc Dubois, all the insiders are saying the same thing, which means they're hearing something from somewhere, and insiders don't make a habit of taking bad information and sharing it. This is like homogenous in the idea that everything the people who get this information are saying is that Pierre-Luc Dubois is gone. So you have to move him in order to get something back for him before you lose him for nothing. When you take into the Mark Scheifele situation, what's happening right here? Can anyone see where Mark Scheifele is at right now? Him putting himself in a situation where he's going to re-up for another 6 or 7 years here. I think he's already out the door. And if those two guys are going out the door, and the idea that Connor Hellebuyck is going to stay is a stretch as it is. I've been saying this for a long time. I think the Jets host one of the biggest garage sales we've ever seen in NHL history, and those three players are gone out the door. I think the Jets tried to retool last year. They were trying to move players like what we're talking about and getting equal value. So I'll give you my Mark Scheifele, you give me your Mark Scheifele, and that's not what people wanted to do. I think the Jets wanted to try and keep everything equal. They wanted to keep everything equal on the idea that they were going to move out a 30-year-old and bring in a 30-year-old and just try and continue and stay well. That's not what the rest of the league is looking for. The league says, we'll give you your now in exchange for our future, and the Jets weren't willing to exchange that future. I think they will be this offseason. I think you're going to see a very significant movement of top-end players, and I'll say it again, I think it's Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think it's Connor Hellebuyck, I think it's Mark Scheifele. I think they're all gone. I think they get moved out, and the Jets are going to try and have some kind of rebuild, maybe keep a team that's strong enough. You keep a guy like Kyle Connor around, maybe you keep Nick Ehlers around. If you have that option and you try and add some solid players in, you become a Nashville Predators type team that tries to work its way into the playoff while all the young assets that you got in return for those players that you've moved work their way up. Or maybe you go a little bit deeper and you move guys like Kyle Connor as well as Nick Ehlers. I think that's far too many players. I don't see them doing that. But if you did, then you do a complete teardown and rebuild. But my feeling, the core that we've come to know for so long for the Winnipeg Jets, there's a ticking time bomb in the middle of it. It is going to be blown up. The Winnipeg Jets you see next year is going to be much different than the Winnipeg Jets you see this year. And I'll be honest, I don't think there is any other choice for Kevin Cheveldayoff or whoever the general manager may be who has to deal with that situation. This core has shown us who they are, what they are capable of, and they've shown us that the run that they've had should be coming to an end.
Yeah, well, listen, I put it this way. I don't even think that there's a contract offer to Mark Scheifele. I mean, I think that they realize they need to make changes, and he'll be one of the guys at the start. The one place that I will differ with you, and I'm not saying this will happen, but I think the Winnipeg Jets do everything they can do this summer to give a monster deal to Connor Hellebuyck and get him to stay. Now, maybe they say no and take their chances going forward, but you do run the risk of having a bad season, being hurt. That is the one thing playing into their hands when it comes with Hellebuyck saying, hey, you're going to be our franchise player. We're going to make you the highest paid goaltender. And as I said, if I'm the agent, I go, here's a pen. And then, if he's not in a good situation a couple years later on, ask for a trade, work that out. But as far as the other player, like the guys up front that you just talked about, I think it's basically a done deal already that'll be the case. And it'll certainly be fun for off-season business around here, much like it was last year. Although we waited so long for something to happen, it really was just the coach being changed, which was the huge change.
Just before you let me go, I agree it's a done deal with those other players. The reason I suggest Hellebuyck is because if you are going to tear down to a degree, then you're just putting Hellebuyck, your sales pitch to him is, hey, you know how all these last 5 years you've basically needed to be Superman to keep us going? That's what your future looks like. You're going to sign long-term here and be Superman for a team just to try and keep them afloat. The thing about moving Hellebuyck is I think if you are trying to move Mark Scheifele and Pierre-Luc Dubois and find in that the next generation of potential superstar players, I think the one player that sweetens the pot to a degree that teams may lose their mind and throw legitimate players that you know are going to be stars in the future in for a trade, that's Connor Hellebuyck. Because we know that Connor Hellebuyck is the kind of player that teams who think they have a shot to do something special look at and say, that guy can put us way over the top. That's when guys say our future does not matter. Our present is the only thing that matters. So you take whatever you want of our future because we need your present, because that present could put us over the top and maybe make us Stanley Cup winners. That's why I think Connor Hellebuyck's out the door.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, it's a very valid point. I just think that the Jets will exhaust everything they can do to try to get him signed. And if that doesn't happen, he is the one guy, unlike Scheifele, who I think, I know some people think he's getting a 6 or 7 year deal at $1 million. I think the jury is very much out on him, and I would take the under on that. Hellebuyck is the one guy where you could potentially have like a Matthew Tkachuk sort of a deal where, you're trading to a guy, there's an extension in place, and that increases that significantly increases the return back. That being said, I hope that doesn't happen. Rennie, great stuff, man. Late night with you and Kenny tomorrow. We'll look forward to a little after dark with K&R after the Sharks game. Thanks for doing this, man. Always love having you on the show.
Anytime. I love spending time with you, and say hi to Hammy for me.
Right on, right on. Yes, Jeff Hamilton is on deck. We'll get to him right away. A big shout out to our friends at Royal Sports, Winnipeg and Manitoba's #1 sports superstore with the best selection of licensed merchandise from the Jets, Bombers, NHL, NFL, CFL, Major League Baseball with Jays season starting, Raptors and NBA, international soccer, not to mention the biggest hockey section in town with great deals, including right now end-of-season specials, including Warrior hockey sticks, some Warrior hockey sticks up to 50% off, snowboards, boots, bindings for that spring break trip you might be going on, and all the cool stuff over on the Kings Skate, Snow, and Surf side. Pop down and see them in person, 750 Pembina Highway. Follow them on Instagram at Royal Sports Pembina for the latest merchandise drops and sale information. Fellas, if you're looking to upgrade your menswear, one stop is all you need, and that is down to F Apparel at 190 Smith Street. The leaders in custom clothing and suits for men, with their custom suits beginning at just $400. Custom shirts, both tucked and untucked dress shirts. You got pants, chinos, golf pants, and more. And it's very simple. You go down there, they'll measure you up, you decide your patterns, fabrics, and a few weeks later, you got some great custom-looking clothes made to fit. If you are at a wedding party, 15% off for the entire wedding party this summer where you get your suits at F Apparel, and a free custom shirt and tie for any 2023 graduate with a custom suit for the young man moving on to the next stage of his life. Find out more in person at 190 Smith Street downtown, or check them out online at EPHapparel.com. You can also make an appointment to come in online. And hey, big shout out to our friends over at Boston Pizza. No better place to get together with your gang to watch the Jets than your local BP. Tomorrow night, late night game against the San Jose Sharks, but another big one for the Jets as they finish up this Western road trip. Make plans to get to your local BP. Couple ice cold schooners, some delicious Boston wings, gourmet pizzas. What could be better than that? And hey, if you are staying at home tonight, you can always order online at bostonpizza.com. All right, let's continue this conversation with Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press. Hammer, what's up? How was the weekend? Oh, Remo, you got Jeff muted.
No, he didn't. I muted myself because
that was Jeff.
Yeah, that was me. That's not, let's not put it on Remo. That was me. And I was like the goofball, started talking, realizing this pulsating microphone was red in front of me. Anyways, weekend was good. It was split between a couple of things. I was in Calgary for a few days after I got home from Nashville and St. Louis and Montreal. Just for some reason, need to get out of Dodge again and did just that. So spent a few days in Alberta, and then was home by the end of the weekend, and now just getting ready to get back to work and cover all things NHL, specifically the Jets, and CFL, maybe the Bombers. We'll see.
Well, hey, while you're in Calgary, what was the vibe around there about the home team? I mean, was there much hope that team could maybe make a run and challenge the Jets before we get to Game 82?
Yeah, I think it's not a great feeling there. A lot of people have kind of written them off. A lot of frustration with this team, particularly after last year. And just, I think a lot of it has to do with some of the infighting that we've been hearing, whether it be through Elliotte Friedman or other people just not being on the same page with Daryl Sutter. So I feel like there's a handful of people who like Daryl Sutter and what he brings to the table and likes his kind of no nonsense approach and whatnot. And then there's the other half that don't really love a lot of what he's doing there and feels like he's broken this team. But you know what though? Like, I mean, I wish I could be as positive as Sunshine Sean Reynolds. In that, I think I think Calgary, just given their, I still think the Jets get into the playoffs. I'm with them on that. But if you look at the remaining schedule, Calgary's got a pretty ideal situation as far as catching up. It's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy, but certainly they're in the race and should be an exciting 9-10 games here down the stretch.
Well, I mean, and that's why I think the Winnipeg Jets have to win tomorrow, and they have to win that game against the Detroit Red Wings on Friday. You've only got 2 opportunities for points this week before New Jersey comes to town, and then that huge game with the Calgary Flames. And, with them making up to 2 points on Saturday, they're not that far out. Now, the Jets do have the benefit of the tiebreaker, which could be significant depending on what happens. But you want to get to it where that game in Winnipeg is not a 2-point deficit. You have to make things happen right now. And listen, they got things done against some of the lesser lights, the Coyotes and the Ducks last week. This was the one real test on the road trip going up against a top-level playoff team that is playing very well. And obviously a poor start, you get behind, makes it very, very tough to come back with, especially when, you're just simply not getting much out of the guys that, when the chips are down, you usually rely on to score goals. Listen, of that entire 5 games, if there was going to be a loss on it, I think the Kings obviously was that one. I think the Jets, if they can win a couple games, will still be in a good position coming out of the Detroit game if they can get that win, and in San Jose. But the one thing I took away from the game on Saturday is that if that is the sort of team that's awaiting the Winnipeg Jets in the playoffs, there's going to be some massive changes that need to happen, which I'm not sure are possible to have them even compete with those teams because, I mean, the second half of that game, that was as comfortable a team you will see defending a lead in the LA Kings as to what the Jets were bringing and what weren't bringing them when the game was on the line.
Well, I think if you ask the Jets, they'd say the same thing, that there's a handful of things that need to change, particularly in Saturday's game. It's been a theme for a while now. It was a bit of a break, I think, in that Arizona game where they went up a couple goals, but giving up early goals against good teams that know how to shut down games or play with a lead, if you will, that's not a recipe for success. And that's certainly not a recipe for success in the playoffs. You think goals are hard to come by right now, and they certainly are as far as the regular season goes. This is, we've been talking about this for weeks, maybe even months now, that this is when things ramp up. This is when teams, get tighter in all 3 zones and try to give up less. And we certainly saw that with the LA Kings. I mean, this team is ready. They don't have any questions, or at least not the questions that the Winnipeg Jets have heading into the playoffs. This is a team that knows who they are, knows how they should play, knows the recipe for success, and most importantly, executes it on a regular basis. I think they have points in their last 11 or 12 games. I wouldn't be surprised if the LA Kings rise to the top in the Western Conference and very well play the Jets in that first round. And as you mentioned on the show already, and it's been talked about, Pierre-Luc Dubois' post-game comments, I think, you mentioned he felt they did some things good. And I think you can make that argument for a good, for chunks of that game, the Jets looked like they were on the same level as the Kings. And we're certainly pushing the play at points, not as long as stretches as they needed to, but certainly at certain points. But then, as you mentioned, that was about as comfortable as a team gets when they're comfortable in their identity, they're comfortable in their structure. And when you give them a lead, it allows them to play that even more confidently. And we saw that with the Kings, and the Jets just weren't able to get through that 1-3-1 that they employ, and certainly got a taste of what it's going to take for the playoffs, to compete in the playoffs, to win in the playoffs. And while the Jets have maybe been taking some steps in the right direction, certainly have quite a ways to go if they're going to want to be in the same conversation as the LA Kings come postseason time.
Jeff, listen, I've really liked Adam Lowry's line as of late. I've liked the 4th line. I thought Pierre-Luc Dubois and Kyle Connor, when getting back together in the previous game, looked quite good. There were some moments in that game on Saturday, but probably wasn't top. But I mean, this entire conversation around the Jets right now and around the core really starts with one guy, and it's Mark Scheifele. And he has looked so out of it since being benched against the Carolina Hurricanes. I mentioned that, Rick Bowness played a card, and it's kind of showing up to be the worst case scenario. I mean, what do you make of what we haven't seen from Scheif, the total lack of response at the most important time of the season, despite still playing big minutes for the Winnipeg Jets? And is there anything that Rick Bowness can do? Or is this basically a matter of Mark Scheifele's going to kind of wake up and come to work and be ready to go, or this is the way it's going to be for the remainder of the season, and then you bring the TNT to the dressing room and move on to the offseason with massive changes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded one. It is perplexing that Mark Scheifele, given the way he'd been playing earlier in the season, improved defensively. A lot of us were talking about, and I think that certainly was the case. He wasn't great. He's never really been great defensively, but he looked like he was in line with everybody else and wanting to pull that rope. And now it's just, you see a completely different player. I mean, there's times where he seems disinterested. I mean, you have to think he cares. I mean, you can't think, if you don't care, and that's I think the thing that's been tossed out here quite often. If you don't care, that becomes quite obvious with your teammates. It doesn't matter if you're best friends with a guy or tight with a guy. If you feel like you're one of your top players, in this case Mark Scheifele being the number one centerman on this team, arguably easily the most important player on forward. I mean, if he's exhibiting signs inside that room that he doesn't care, I think we would already hear about that, and there would be a bit of a blow up, if you will. But I think what the issue is, and I'll piggyback off what Sean said in your last segment. I think this is a challenge that Mark Scheifele is just not used to getting, or at least not used to getting when the goings are tough. I think when things were all cheeky and nice and peachy and all those positive things. Early on in the season, and things were growing for him, and he was scoring a bunch of goals. It was easy to kind of come out and talk about whatever was negative at the time. I can't even remember, but there were certainly no games are perfect, and even having those conversations were good. But now you look at the back half of the season and really the last couple months, and I mean, you look at Mark Scheifele getting benched for that second period, which I think he kind of added insult to injury by not talking after the game and then kind of doubling down and not really wanting to. I just don't think that much like we saw with Blake Wheeler last year, maybe the leadership role is becoming a burden for him. Maybe I just don't think that I don't think this kind of adversity where he's being challenged, by his coach, by his team. You talk about Rick Bowness. I mean, we've talked about this for weeks now, Huss. I don't think there is anything else he can possibly do. He's done all the tricks. He's done new tricks, including calling his players out. And he hasn't called them out specifically. But Mark Scheifele knows exactly who he's talking about. And if you want to consider yourself one of the best players on this team, which he does, he's certainly talking about him when needed more. But I mean, that's not just Mark Scheifele. That's Kyle Connor, who's not scoring goals. That's Pierre-Luc Dubois, who brings a lot more passion, I would argue, but hasn't been a driver on more nights than he should be this in this part of the season. But it's all going to go on 55 just because of what we've been dealing with over the last couple seasons, particularly his comments post at the end of last season about wanting to see where his future was, if his future was in Winnipeg. And the reality is, I mean, your future is in Winnipeg. You had at that point had 2 years on your deal, and so to kind of see him revert back to that player who is defensively irresponsible, who seems to be on every time the other team scores a goal, and this to kind of see him respond both on the ice, which hasn't been all that inspiring, and then also off the ice, not facing the media and not doing what a member of the leadership group does. I mean, of course you're going to be criticized in a hockey mad city, and so while it doesn't all fall on him, it's going to fall all on him to get himself and himself alone out of this funk. Because as you've been saying for segments here, we've been saying for weeks, I mean, this team is not going to go very far in the playoffs, is not going to be able to achieve what they want to achieve this season without their top centerman being their top centerman and being a driver. And we just, we have about 8 games left here to see that flip switch. I know you've been talking a lot about that. That's just not something that you do. You got to be going into the playoffs playing the top of your game, whether individually or collectively. And right now, 55 and the Jets are doing neither.
Well, I mean, listen, I don't believe teams can just flip a switch. But I'll tell you
Neither do the players.
When a singular player has been in such a funk. I mean, I do think he could come and have a much better game, and it would look like he's flipped the switch, but maybe that's just because the bar has been set so low. But an interesting comment from T. Will in chat says, not sure why people are blaming Shife's play on the benching. Shife was playing bad way before that. That's why he was benched. I have to disagree with that. I mean, listen, there certainly were points in the second half of the season where a lot was being left to be desired. But the thing about that Carolina game was that came off those back-to-back wins against Florida and Tampa, arguably saving their season on that road trip. And those two games, I mean, we came back on Monday talking about how engaged Scheifele was, particularly in that Florida game. And maybe he got an early goal and was really feeling it that night. But, I mean, put it this way, he was in the battle way more. And, I mean, honestly, Jeff, since that Carolina benching, it has been, I mean, there has been nothing like that. And, I mean, Kevin Sawyer, on a couple of occasions, has pointed out, you know, shying away from anything sort of physical. I mean, the laundry list of things that are concerning are very, very long. But this last 2-week period since that game in Carolina, if you thought things were bad before, they've gotten way, way worse. And as I say, I mean, the coaches must be banging their heads against the walls. And I'll be honest, I think the teammates in that dressing room must be as well, because we have seen Nikolai Ehlers and Dubois and Kyle Connor last week kind of showed that they do care and they are engaged. I mean, Connor got smoked by Silverberg early on in that Anaheim game, and then ended up scoring right there in the blue paint where they had been telling them to go. I mean, I think we have seen some response. Could it be more? Absolutely. Do they need to consistently play better? Yes. But those players have shown something, and the other guy hasn't.
And I think that's a fair argument to make. I mean, certainly when you look at some of the shifts, you look at some of the efforts made or not made. I mean, I guess my point is that you know, it's not just Mark Scheifele not scoring, right? I mean, Kyle Connor's not scoring goals, and he needs to be doing that, right? It's just when you're a centerman, when you're expected to be a driver, which I'd argue Mark Scheifele's never been in his career. You know, he's been certainly a very talented player, but he's not a driver like a Sidney Crosby or a Connor McDavid. I mean, he doesn't naturally make his best players, the players around him better. In fact, I'd almost argue he's had to rely on other players to make him better. And I think that continues today. It's certainly an interesting debate about, how much of this falls on Mark Scheifele, but to me, it's just you're seeing a guy who's just defeated, right? I mean, whether it was before the benching, which I think you can make an argument that Mark really hadn't been playing well in the turn of the calendar. I mean, it wasn't brutal, but you look at those games, particularly in Florida. I mean, so that's what he needs to get up, is to have the coach that he despises on the other bench. Like, can Paul Maurice be an assistant coach on every team down the stretch here? The Jets might win the Stanley Cup. But to me, that's emotional immaturity. If you can't get up in this league at this point, if you need to get up for a guy who you visibly despise and felt like, hurt your career. Meanwhile, you were putting up numbers throughout all those seasons, giving ample opportunity, right? Like, that's a lack of accountability here. It's not like Mark Scheifele has been benched all that often. And when he was benched under Paul Maurice, I think that was under Paul Maurice before, it was like it was like national news, because Paul Maurice was just so against sending that kind of message to any individual player, particularly of Mark Scheifele's stature. So to me, it's a lot of, I'll even piggyback again off of what Sean said, because me and Sean share a lot of similar thoughts and have these conversations quite often. It's a culture thing, and the reality is that if Mark Scheifele isn't leading by example on the ice and off the ice, then what's everybody else in the locker room thinking? That they need to be doing all the things that Mark Scheifele's not doing? That was what happened when he didn't want to talk to the media post game. I mean, he doesn't want to go talk to the media. Okay, Mark said no, so what? Kyle Connor has to say yes now? It's just, to me, this is somebody who I think is just, the writing's clearly on the wall here. I heard you say that, I can't imagine the Jets don't offer him some sort of contract or extension. I just think that would just be kind of crazy.
You think they will?
I think they will. Yeah. I mean, do I think he'll accept it? No. Do I think they'll offer him something that's in the range that he wants? No. But I do think they'll offer him something. I just think that
What would happen if he said yes?
Well, then you probably have a centerman a similar deal that he has now, which is cheaper, than he would get on the market. You're right. I mean, I think this organization. You're right. I think this organization doesn't need to, but I think it is a slap in the face if you don't at least have those conversations. And I think at this point, whether it's the Jets as an organization or Mark Scheifele as an individual player, and this is just shitty to say with 8 games remaining to fans, but it's very clear that a change of scenery is a benefit to both sides. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see, come this summer when those talks, get underway and Mark expresses his displeasure here. I mean, I don't think how he could be in any better of a mood than he was at the end of last season. And, especially with, some other guys that we'd mentioned, they're probably not going to be on board. It'll be fascinating to see what those conversations lead to or where he ends up started next season.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, now that we're hearing all the insiders around having the same conversations that we've been having here dating back to last season, I mean, I think the end is all but certain. And I mean, to me, I think that, when they get together after this season, regardless of what Scheif has to say at the end of the year and how this last little bit goes, I think they all agree that, moving on is probably in the best interest of all parties involved. And the best case scenario for the Winnipeg Jets would be that there are a few interested suitors that would be willing to extend Mark Scheifele, and you're able to talk to them about those teams, get some sort of a deal in place that they're getting him for more than the 1 year. I mean, this goes back to why I brought up at the beginning of last season that maybe they need to start thinking about that last year, because they still did have a talented player on a good deal for basically 2 seasons, and that really does have value. It's a lot less so if you're just getting a guy for 1 season. So, I mean, to me, that's where those conversations go. But needless to say, we're going to have a very active summer, I'm sure, on Winnipeg Sports Talk, talking about all these things. Maybe a lot of the things that we expected to happen last season finally do happen this year. But, it's very clear. Now things are coming from the organization out to the guys that they do feed that information to, that it sounds like it's sort of the end of the core. And I mean, I don't know how you could watch this team for the last couple months and not think that was blatantly overdue. Maybe a lot of people don't watch it as much as the people here in this chat, and we do each and every day. But this is not going to surprise anybody around the league at this point when this happens.
Well, no, and it shouldn't surprise anybody. And I mean, I think it's going to be one of those, you mentioned the sign kind of trades. I think that's got to be the situation for all 3 of the guys that have been in conversation, right? Pierre-Luc Dubois and Connor Hellebuyck included. I agree with you. I think there's going to be a team out there that's going to be interested in Mark Scheifele's skill set. I mean, assuming he doesn't go completely invisible, I mean, he's going to probably most likely hit the 40-goal season, and that's not nothing to dismiss. I mean, teams' goals are currency, the most important currency, and certainly a team will look at that and want to sign him to, a guy who's 30 years old, who still has 3, 4, 5 good seasons in him, most likely to perform. So the thing will be, though, is that you're not bringing him in as your core leader, or any leader for that matter. I mean, this is a small league. People talk. I mean, it only takes a couple text messages to find out who exactly a player is on the ice and off the ice. And I'm assuming the scouting reports for him off the ice will probably not be as glowing as they are on the ice. So I don't think if you're a team that's looking to build around a player, I don't think that's Mark Scheifele. But I also don't think Mark, we talked about this in the past. Mark Scheifele signed his deal at quite possibly the worst time ever. And Blake Wheeler, quite possibly the best time ever. Right around those 2 contract signings were when teams stopped paying you for what you've done and started paying you for what you were going to do. And so I just don't think Mark Scheifele is going to be a 30-year-old free agent here, 31, I guess, after next season, and is going to be viewed as a $10+ million player. So it'll be fascinating to see what his price tag is, but he certainly is serviceable for a team like, for instance, and we talked about this amongst the rabble, is, would a Boston Bruins team like a player like Mark Scheifele, right? They're going to be seeing a few guys leave their locker room, and they're going to have obviously a great leadership core that kind of sends a message. I think a guy like Mark Scheifele being put into that atmosphere.
Can he play a Boston Bruins style? I watched that Bruins game yesterday, and I'll be honest, I'm watching this game going, this looks like a different league than the team I'm watching each and every night.
Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves talking
battle
about Boston Bruins and Mark Scheifele.
Well, the thing is, Bruins is a great Bruins is interesting because, I mean, look at how Taylor Hall, who was sort of the linchpin before with Edmonton and with Jersey, and the way he's fit in as not the guy, but a very, very important, talented piece of a championship level team.
Absolutely. I mean, and just, I guess my point in saying the Boston Bruins, not even just from a salary cap perspective, because, Patrice Bergeron's probably not playing another season after this year. Krejci, I think, is only making $1 million, but still, he's not going to be back. But so there is some freed up space there. My point is that he's probably going to have to go into a locker room that's fully established their culture and game. You know what I mean? Like, you're not bringing them, I think there's enough evidence here to argue that you're not bringing a Mark Scheifele in to guide your team to the next level. Like, I just don't think that's what he brings. He brings a guy who can, clearly loves the game, works on his game. There's certain, and that's kind of the most perplexing of all this is it's not like this guy's not caring about his game. Like, I don't think anybody, in the league necessarily cares more about their game as far as putting in extra work. I mean, this guy sheds his gear, and I don't know, 10 minutes later, he's talking to Adam Oates about his game. Like, they're very, they remain extremely close, and who knows what impact that's had on Mark Scheifele and his opinion of the Winnipeg Jets and the coaching staff. But we know that that's been an issue in the past. And so, this is a guy who cares about his game. It's just, he just doesn't seem to be able to execute it at least the way that, he should be executed. And for what reason, who knows? I don't know. I mean, he's obviously not happy. And we all know, Mark's is a horrible loser in that sense that he hates losing. And so I think, not just Mark Scheifele, but the entire team, just the way they've been built, some of the deficiencies they've shown in the past where they, sometimes have been mentally weak and not been able to get through some of those mental hurdles that come in the, the hardest part of the season. I mean, to see them, like, it's kind of not really a surprise right now to see them not rising to the occasion when things get rough. We always talked about once things didn't get as easy and the victories didn't come, who would respond? And Rick Bowness said as much of that, 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, that we were going to see. Well, here we are, weeks later, months later now, and I think we got a pretty good idea who doesn't, respond to the, the adversity and the hurdles and all the other challenges that come with playing the most intense hockey of the regular season, and that's right now. 55's in that group, but so is a couple other guys, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'll say that, and I mean, listen, all we need, I think it was BA or something, is talking about third line scoring. I mean, if Adam Lowry didn't snap out of his funk and score those 3 goals in 4 games, I mean, 2 game winners, one goal to bring them from a 1-goal deficit to get into OT where they won, this team's out of the playoffs right now. And listen, I got a lot of time for Adam Lowry and everything he does for the team and the way that line is going, what Morgan Barron's doing right now. But the third and fourth line cannot carry this team to the playoffs. They absolutely need more. And that's why I was buoyed by seeing Connor back with Dubois and the way that they played against the Anaheim Ducks. I think there was some more of that. But again, you do have to give some credit to the Los Angeles Kings. I mean, right now, that line with 55, 26, and 27 is just, it ain't happening right now. And I wonder what that does to Nikolai Ehlers. And I just wonder how much longer Rick Bowness can continue putting those guys out as much as he can. But the bottom line is he doesn't have many other options. I mean, Steny and Saku Menelainen and Morgan Barron are not going to be able to go out there. They just don't have anywhere close to the ceiling as those players that you have. And it is it's tough decisions right now for Rick Bowness, considering how vital every single one of these points is. Hammer, always great having you on the program. Just before we finish up, and I know we've been focusing all about the Jets, Bombers signed a kicker on the weekend. I know that got a lot of run amongst Bomber fans on social media. Do you know much about this guy that's coming in, and how do you see, will this be a full legit kicking competition, and can the Bombers have an American kicker next year?
Yeah, I had to look up the email again to even find out this kicker's name. So place kicker Chandler Stanton. Yeah, a pretty cool resume. Certainly is proven that he can kick at levels. Is that the right guy? I see you Googling there too. So I don't know if because here's the thing. My point is that, okay, great. I think there was a lot of excitement that this guy was going to be added to the list. We'll see what he's like when he gets here, when he starts kicking in these conditions. I certainly, believe that this team needs to have a different kicker this year, unless Mark Lego can come out this. He'll be in the competition. That as much seems clear. But unless he comes kicking the lights out and beating everybody and by a large margin, I just don't see him being the kicker. I do like the fact that they're bringing in some talent, some competition. I think that certainly was promised by General Manager Kyle Walters, and this would certainly be a step in that direction. I still think the Winnipeg Blue Bombers need to go out and get an experienced kicker. I think they need to get someone who knows the CFL. I think they need to, whether that's the trade, whether that's trading with another team, trying to find out other guys. Maybe Balharry, I saw he posted a video out there. Obviously joking on that one, but he did post a video. To me, it's one of those things where that was the missing link last year, and if you didn't learn your lesson last season, then you never will. So as much as this kicker might be the next guy, I certainly think there's going to be more competition. Like I said, I expect a more veteran presence to be there to really push for that position and solidify that spot in the Bombers roster.
Hammer, great stuff, buddy. Thanks for doing this. We'll look forward to seeing what happens this week and doing it again next week on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Thanks for your time as always.
Always a pleasure, Huss. Glad we could be civil this week. I think this was a good week for us.
Don't worry, we'll fire it up. We'll fire it up in a couple of weeks once we get through these next 8 games in the playoffs. So
there'll be tons to argue about over the next days, weeks, and months. Shout out to the viewers as well. You guys know you make this show. Have a great one.
Thanks, dude. There it is. Hey, interesting tweak to the lines in practice that we're just getting right now. We'll get to that in just a quick second. Got to give a big congratulations to Carrie Anderson and her crew. They did not get the gold medal. They lost in the semis, but they did win another bronze at the World Women's Curling Championship. An incredible season that is not done yet. Carrie and all the top teams of both the men's and the women's side are going to be in Toronto coming up from April 11th to 16th for the Players Championship, brought to you by Princess Auto. And I'm actually going to go out and do some shows from there. Also, the first week of the Jays at home. So it'll be fun to do a few shows out from Toronto coming up as the Jets finish up their regular season on the road before the Stanley Cup playoffs begin the following week. So stay tuned to Winnipeg Sports Talk for coverage of that. Of course, Princess Auto, not only a huge sponsor of curling, but also your Winnipeg Blue Bombers and WST. And the place where you'll find the best deals on the most unique assortment of tools and equipment around. Everything you need to complete the projects on your list or start something new is at Princess Auto. 2 Winnipeg locations, Panet Road, Portage Avenue West. You can always shop online 24/7, 365 at princessauto.com. Culligan Water, family owned for over 65 years, the go-to folks for water products and services for you and your family. They've got it all: water softeners, filters, bottled water coolers, whole home systems, and drinking water systems, not to mention citywide water delivery services and commercial and industrial products, water products and solutions as well. Find them at 1200 Sargent Avenue. You can give them a call at 204-694-5180 or check them out online at drinkculligan.com. And a big cheers to our friends over at Canadian Club Whiskey. Hope you got on that flash sale in the 12-year on the weekend. But right now, good news as we get closer to spring. Canadian Club and Ginger Ale now available in 473 milliliter cans as singles at your local Manitoba liquor marts or your favorite beer vendor. Look for it, and if you don't see it, ask for it. And we'll be ready to have a few of those coming up at IG Field for Bomber season. Of course, Canadian Club is the official sponsor of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. All right, we still have Elliotte Friedman's comments to come. We will also get to our Coolbet lines and talk about the lines in today. If you popped in a little later on, it's been a great show today. Tons of folks in the chat. Hit that red subscribe button if you haven't already. Well over 400 today for most of the show. And if you are new, join us daily, 1 p.m. live Central here on Winnipeg Sports Talk on YouTube. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search Winnipeg Sports Talk and subscribe there for the audio component, usually around 3:30 in the afternoon as soon as we're done. And don't forget, pinned tweet at the top, Sports Trivia Night, Wednesday, Little Brown Jug. If you haven't already, we'd love to see you there. Hang out with us, have some great beers, some fun sports trivia. Get your tickets now in the link. And if you're listening on the podcast, go to winnipegsportstalk.com. There's a link right up at the top of the main page to join us on Wednesday. Hopefully we will see you there. All right, let's get Michael Remis back in here. And Reem, before we listen to a little bit more audio from the Jets in these clips, the Jets are practicing right now, and we have seen a bit of a tweak to the lines. And to be honest, I think this is one of the only things that Rick Bowness was going to be able to do. Here are your lines. Connor, Dubois, Niederreiter. Nemetsnikov has been moved with Scheifele and Wheeler. And Nikolai Ehlers has been moved with Adam Lowry and Mason Appleton. Morgan Barron staying with Stenny and Manalainen on the fourth line. Extras, Axel Jonsson-Fjallby, David Gustafsson, and Carson Kuhlman. And, you know, I thought Ehlers had been one of the Jets' best forwards over the course of the past 10 games. Certainly had shown that he was engaged. He'd been shooting the puck. He was getting points. And that just hadn't been happening playing with Scheifele and Wheeler. And the Adam Lowry line continues to drive. Now, do they have the high-end offensive talent of a Nikolai Ehlers? No. But both Mason Appleton and Adam Lowry have shown a knack for getting to the net. Ehlers has been shooting the puck a lot. I like this move. It's you wouldn't normally think of playing Ehlers with Adam Lowry and Appleton as the solution, but considering the way things are going for the line that he was on, and in particular Scheifele and Wheeler, I think getting Ehlers off that line is something that the coach had to do. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what they do with the ice time, because I think if you look, you see Ehlers' third line, and you're like, well, I don't know if that's. I mean, he's not a third line guy, so that would be my concern. You still got Wheeler.
Well, I would argue that that's not the third line.
You don't think so? You think it's the second?
I think
Which line?
The second line right now.
You think the third line's the Scheifele line?
Yeah.
I guess the way they've been scoring. One thing that, Morgan Barron has played so well, it just seems like he's more than a fourth line player at this point, but I guess they want to go for the balanced lines, and we'll see, more even minutes. I think the fourth line did play. He had that one game where he had the one game, the outlier game, where he played like 5 minutes, but usually it's been closer to 10. So I guess we'll see. What about them putting Nemesnikov back with Ehlers somehow? No, I don't know how you manage that, but they played so well together, and they've kind of gone away from it since Dubois came back.
Well, listen, I have no issue with putting a player like Ehlers on Lowry's wing for the short term right now. To try to give him a little bit more time and space to carry the puck, be that guy that will be, the guy setting up and generating most of the offense, and to have a couple guys that aren't afraid to get in front of the net and bang in a rebound, which has been a big part of both the goals that Appleton and Lowry have scored over the course of the past week, which has been the most prolific line for the Winnipeg Jets in the games that they've won. I mean, if you go back and look at the ice time in the game on Saturday night, relatively even amongst Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois led the way. Connor with 21 minutes, Dubois with 20 minutes. Scheifele was next at 19, but 552 of it was on the power play. Like at even strength, Scheifele was 13.25, Dubois was 14.25. But I mean, Mason Appleton was not far off. He was 13. Adam Lowry was 10.37, but also did play some time on shorthanded. Whereas Nikolai Ehlers played 11-14 even strength and did get 5 minutes on the power play. At 5-on-5 right now, I'll be very interested to see how this looks tomorrow. And I wouldn't be surprised if the 5-on-5 ice time is basically near even between the Scheifele line and the Lowry line. And I think we know that the Dubois-Connor line will be leading the way.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You mentioned 5-on-5, and we were just talking about Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor. I have been looking into the numbers here since January 17, when these guys, January 17, where we said, okay, this has kind of been the beginning of the Jets' downfall, that Montreal game. I mean, those guys have, they've been on the ice for a lot more goals against than goals for. Kyle Connor leads the team in on ice goals against at 5-on-5, 31. He's been on the ice for only 17-4. And Scheifele's got 19-4 and 26 against. So, you compare first half to second half. I mean, these guys are like point per game and above players. And since January 17, just in all situations here for these guys, it hasn't gone well. I mean, since in last 30 games, Scheifele's, among him and Connor are leading the team in points, 22 and 30. But these guys were point per game guys and above until that point. So they got to figure out a way to get going. They've tried shuffling lines. I don't know. Do you go back to Ehlers with Dubois and Connor, or I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, then you're basically loading all of your offense right now into one line. And I mean, I think they really do feel that Niederreiter can be a nice addition with Dubois and with Connor on that top line. And I think adding Nikolai Ehlers to the Lowry line adds just a whole different dynamic, where he probably isn't as good in the corners and maybe defensively as Nemetsnikov is, but he adds a whole nother level of offense. And I think Rick Bowness is looking at this situation right now and going, I can't count on anything from what was my top line offensively right now. And we're going to see if Ehlers can, make a little bit more happen playing along with Lowry, along with two players that I think he's much more confident in to handle things in his own end, certainly than Mark and Blake. I want to get to these. I want to get to these Elliotte Friedman clips, but we got a couple other things from the weekend, Reem. Which ones do we want to get to? We've got to Bones. We heard from PLD. I'm still choked about this cross-check on Josh Morrissey and another joke suspension from NHL player safety of one game. The second cross-check to the face in the league that has led to stitches and injury, and it's only worth one game right now, one regular season game. So what's that, half a period when we get to the playoffs if you do that?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, they got the 5-minute power play. I mean, what does him getting suspended more really do for the Jets? So
I'm just talking about in general. I mean, it's a joke.
Well, I mean, it's just consistent with what it's been. You don't know what it's going to be, and I still am thinking about this like Mark Scheifele suspension for 4 games against Montreal, which seemed so excessive at the time.
And playoff games.
Yeah, 4, and then even since then, it's been proven how excessive that was. So yeah, I mean, pretty insane that again, the guy goes to drop the gloves to fight, which is allowed, and another guy comes and sticks him in the chin, and he has to leave to get stitches. I mean, it's a ridiculous play. So he got the 5 in a game, and I guess they figured one game was fine. I mean, I don't know what to make of players. Say they do whatever they want to do.
I couldn't believe it that when they gave that one game suspension to the guy in Boston, the cross-check Hoffman. And Hoffman, to his credit, I've never been a big fan of his, but he did an Instagram video saying this is basically a joke. He stitches all over his mouth, just cross-checked in the face one game, and then lo and behold, it happened later on that week, and I guess the precedent was already set by NHL player safety. Let's do number 10 and hear from Josh Morrissey because he did miss considerable part of the game on the weekend, getting stitches inside his mouth and on the outside of his mouth, although still managed to log 23 minutes at almost 24 minutes on the ice for the Winnipeg Jets. Here's what Morrissey had to say about the Lizotte cross-check.
I think it was a 7 or 8 on the inside and 10 on the outside or something like that, 9 or 10.
Just going through your mind on the play itself.
We were kind of going at it up the ice. He kind of hooked me. I kind of slashed. I slashed him for sure. And then he turned around and looked at me and kind of skated in my direction. And I said, let's go, and dropped my gloves and, got his stick up in my face.
Yeah, you look like you're ready to engage him there, but obviously you're not expecting what happened next, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when the guy turns around and skates right at you, I think he's looking to engage, and I said, let's go, and, drop my gloves, and he got his stick up. I don't think he's skating around out there trying to crush that guys in the face, but it happened.
What's your reaction when that happens? It's not what you're expecting, obviously. You called it a pretty dirty play.
My reaction is it hurts a lot, and I, need to get off the ice, I guess. But like I said, I mean, careless play. Thought we were going to go and took a cross check to the chin. Could have been my teeth, so thankfully not.
Yeah, careless, dirty, unnecessary, call it whatever you want. It's BS. And I mean, listen, if that is a 1-game suspension in the regular season, what's that in the playoffs? The old $2,500 fine? Terrible, terrible precedent for NHL player safety to be setting right before we get into the Stanley Cup playoffs.
They don't live by precedents. They do what they want. You can never figure out what the hell they're gonna do. So I think, yeah, ridiculous play, and thankfully, he's able to come back in the game. I mean, I love Ken saying, "What's your reaction to getting a stick in the face?" And he's like, "My reaction is this hurts really bad, and I got to get off the ice." And I gotta say, credit to Josh. His hair looking great in this post game. Like, I don't know if it's like that when he just takes his helmet off or combs it for the cameras, but
he woke up that way. It
looks, man. I mean, when your chin's all like, look at his chin. I know podcast people can't see, but it is.
And that was only half the stitches was on the outside of his face. The other half were inside. And as I said, Morrissey missed an extended period of time getting stitched up and still managed to play almost 24 minutes in the game. Here's what Morrissey had to say about the game overall from his perspective.
I thought we did some good things. They're a team that if you get down by a couple, they're pretty hard to play against. And that 1-3-1, especially when ice isn't very good, is tough to get through. And that's their bread and butter, and they're good at it. So I thought we played a little bit into it at times, but I thought the compete level was there. Give up a couple goals off face-offs. You never want that to happen. So post-game, that's the style of hockey that you see this year from good teams. And, a couple little details either way is probably the difference.
All right, there's Josh Morrissey. And one more from Mo. We talked about, the getting and playing from behind against a team like the Los Angeles Kings and how they really did stifle the Jets' ability to just get into the zone and get set up. Morrissey talked about playing into that Kings 1-3-1 on Saturday.
Obviously, the 1-3-1, they've got the support D that's looking to break it out on anything chipped in the corners or anything like that. So, also they're kind of building that wall at the red line, blue line, so there's not a lot of room to make plays, so it can be frustrating. When we were good tonight, I thought we chipped pucks to areas with speed, or we had speed coming underneath. When we played into their hands, it was when we were, either stopped at the line and chipping it in without a forecheck, or trying to sort of do too much. But that's the way it's going to look. Like, that's their strength, so there's going to be times that happens in the game. So, like I said, ice not being great, we could probably look at some adjustments, how we could beat that better.
All right, so there's Josh Morrissey, and I'm just looking at the Farnsey in chat says, I missed those Brendan Shanahan video breakdowns. I don't know how you could justify the video breakdown trying to say this is worthy of a 1-game suspension would have been pure comedy if we got it from NHL player safety, but fortunately they don't make those available like they used to. All right, we've talked a lot about the weekend and look ahead. A big topic of conversation outside of this market from people that are sort of paying attention to what's happened between the Jets in the last 2 months, and especially lately, is about the future of this team coming into the offseason and the core. Here's a couple clips from today's 32 Thoughts podcast with Elliotte, Friedman, and Jeff Merrick. And we'll go with 13, Remo. This is Friedman talking about something that is not news to any of you that have listened to this show, saying it really feels like this is sort of the end of this Jets core that's been so prominent for the last number of years here in Winnipeg.
Do you not just get the sense here that the Jets core that had a good run together and had a lot of promise were just getting to the end of it? And part of it is contracts. Like, Dubois has got a year left, and we all know how he feels. Wheeler's got a year left. Yeah. Scheifele's got a year left. Like, sometimes it's a combination of the group had a run and they represented the Jets extremely well, but sometimes it just comes to the end because of your record. Sometimes it comes to the end because of the contracts. Paul Maurice, he really protected that group. And not so much Dubois, because Dubois came later, but, Wheeler Scheifele, he basically said, these are the guys I trust. These are the guys I like the tone they set. I love how committed they are to doing the work. Like, they're my guys. And with Bowness, it certainly doesn't come across that way. And that's one of the reasons that Bowness was brought in, was to change, the way that the structure was and challenge players a little bit more.
There's an interesting one from Elliotte on the way that Maurice certainly did protect his top guys. And the fact the expectations coming into this year were one of accountability of everybody up and down the lineup. And it certainly went well for the first half of the season. That accountability has not been there recently, and it is obviously a major, major source of concern for Rick Bowness. And I think, in a lot of ways, as Elliotte was just mentioning, sort of tips us off to the way the Jets have to go in the offseason, and that is to make some significant changes. Here's a little bit more from Friedman on more the future of this Winnipeg Jets team and their core.
I just look at this and the way this year is going, and you and I have talked about it. They keep pulling away, and then they let everybody back in. They pull away and they let everybody back in. Well, now they've kind of let everybody back in again. And I just wonder if we're seeing the end of this group. I think the Jets have talked to the Canadians on and off about Dubois. Is there some way we know that Dubois is going to end up there 95%? Is there some way we make a deal so the Canadians get him earlier and we get something we want? I think they've talked about that, but they haven't been able to make the deal. With Scheifele, you've got to basically decide, are you re-signing him or is he re-signing, or do you move him somewhere else? Like I said, those guys represented Winnipeg hard. They talked up Winnipeg when, a lot of people were unsure, do we really want to go there? We've talked about how Cheveldayoff has a tougher job than a lot of other GMs because there's no place that has less of a pool of players available to it than the Jets do. I'm looking at this and I'm saying, boy, this could be the end of an era with the Jets.
All right, so there's a little bit more from Elliotte Friedman on what I think most will agree in all likelihood will be somewhat an end of an era. How great the changes are, we will see. I mean, to me, the key in all of this is Connor Hellebuck, and I think his situation's significantly different from a Scheifele and a Wheeler, and certainly Dubois as well, with one more year of team control. I mean, if you know that he's gone, you got to make something happen. You traded Patrick Laine, your number 2 overall pick, to get him. I mean, if that ends up being nothing, that's a disaster for the organization and the general manager. So all of that. And one of the other questions that they had talked about, Remo, was when it sort of really ended for the Jets, this core. And they brought up Dustin Byfuglien leaving and not coming back. I mean, and again, much like this, the evidence of this core disintegrating was the year before, the second half of the 2019 season. Unfortunately, a lot of what we're seeing right now, we've seen before, and it's a number of the same characters before. And I think that's why you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone inside the organization, outside the organization, in the market, outside the market, that thinks that this is going to continue on for another year. Some would say this is the last possible moment that you can salvage something out of the core. And I think that's what's going to make, presumably, if Kevin Cheveldayoff is the guy calling the shots this offseason, the biggest one for him ever. Probably should have happened earlier, but it has to happen now.
Yeah, well, we thought we were going to see some big moves last season. They didn't happen. They brought it back, and it looked really strong here through 41 games when they were first in the West. And we were having conversations like, well, if everyone having expiring deals next year, do they try to go for it again if they have a good playoff run? And now as we're winding down towards the playoffs, it feels like last year saying, oh, there's going to be some big changes, even though, they're going to probably be in the playoffs here. I don't think Money Puck was around 80%. But you just feel like they don't feel like a playoff team. And part of the reason why they're in is they faltered, but so have Nashville. Got some major injuries. Roman Yossi's missed a bunch of games, and Matt Duchene's still out. And, they traded away Niederreiter. And And who's the other one? The Calgary has just been so inconsistent all year. So the Jets are kind of riding this hot start they had into the playoffs. And what changes? I'm assuming we're going to see a bunch. And someone commented to me on Twitter. I tweeted out the quote that he said. Elliotte said they had a good run. Well, I think he's referring to they had run as in length of time together. You look at the success here. 17-18, they went to the Western Conference Final. 18-19, and I think you and I will both agree the beginning of the end was the second half of the 2019 season, where it's kind of replay where you have the hot start and then you fall off, and then Dustin Byfuglien leaving was kind of the nail in the coffin. 1920 missed the playoffs. They got out of it, but they won the first round against the Oilers there, and then were swept by Montreal, who went to the Cup final, missed the playoffs last year, and now you might get into the 8th spot. So I mean, that's the extent of the core here, and we'll see what happens. It was interesting actually about Dubois. He said 95% to Montreal. They've had conversations. If I'm Montreal, I don't know why you would give up anything substantial if you think he's just going to sign there. They're not really going to be a contender next year. Like, do they need him right away? My only thinking would be, okay, well, if they did get him, you could probably sign him long term, this offseason. The next year, if the cap goes up and he improves his, his price or his cost.
The other thing is there also is a risk, because I think the Winnipeg Jets, it's pretty clear that if this guy's not sticking around, they've got to do something with him this summer. And Montreal will be in the mix, and if they give them an offer that makes sense for them, they have to trade him to whoever gives them the best offer.
Yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's the job of the general manager. I mean, he's looking out for the Winnipeg Jets. And if you're Montreal and the team is, not a particularly good team, as much as it's been rumored and mentioned that that's really the place that he would like to play, if all of a sudden he's traded to a team where he goes and has a big role, loves living there, they have a lot of success, I mean, there's the potential that he ends up staying. So, I mean, the Dubois watch will be everywhere on this program this summer, but he won't be alone with the number of guys that have very, very iffy and cloudy futures when it comes to the Winnipeg Jets, regardless of their contract situation. Listen, we got some other news to talk about coming out of the weekend, and I do want to get to the Coolbet lines in a minute. But don't forget, gang, the post is right up at the top of the chat, and if you're listening on the podcast, head on over to winnipegsportstalk.com. Trivia night, sports trivia night, Wednesday night, just a couple days left. If you haven't already, seating is limited. Please make sure to get your tickets beforehand. Would love to see you down there. The first one was such a blast, seeing all you WSTers there, and I imagine this one will be even better. 7 o'clock Wednesday night, Little Brown Jug downtown in the Exchange. And again, the link is right there in the chat, in the description, and at the top of winnipegsportstalk.com. And I'm really looking forward to trying this new generic lager they just launched. Your basic lager, just better, impressively standard in the best way, light and clean to taste with a mellow flavor and crisp finish. Now Manitoba can support local without having to move away from the domestic taste they've come to expect with the light beer. We'll definitely be enjoying a couple of those on Wednesday night. Hope to see you there down at Little Brown Jug. And a big shout out to our friends Nick and Nikki and the Nick and Nikki DQ group. Man, they've got their hands in a lot of things. Rumors of maybe a pita pit coming up in and around the Niverville area. And I know they're involved in a big project with a new state-of-the-art hotel and water park in Niverville. Shout out to Nick and Nikki for everything they're doing in that community. Of course, the DQ is in Niverville, along with 3 in Winnipeg, Northgate, Polo Park, and DQ St. Anne's. Pop by, get a jump on spring with a blizzard for you and the kids coming up over this next few days. And while you're there, don't sleep on those delicious stack burgers as well at any of the 4 Nick and Nikki DQs. And hit them up on DQ at DQ Manitoba on Instagram if you do want to get an order in via social media for a custom cake to be picked up quick and easy at any of the 4 Nick and Nikki DQs. All right, Remo, before we get to the Coolbet lines, how about our guy Gussie on the weekend?
Yeah, I got some messages in my inbox saying, I know you guys don't really talk a lot about fishing, but Jeff Gustafson from Kenora is currently leading the Bassmaster Classic, the Super Bowl of fishing. And yesterday, he did end up winning. And you and I met him in studio at the old station. And, he's going on this journey on the pro tour, elite status. And pretty incredible that he won the damn thing. First Canadian to do so. It took home $300,000 US for that. So, I mean, incredible achievement there for Gussie Outdoors on social media.
Yeah, at Gussie Outdoors. Give him a follow. He is just, a great, great dude. Had so much fun having him on the program and hoping to get out at some point and learn a few things from the master. But, just to put this in perspective, this is, the Bassmaster Classic, the biggest event on the Bassmaster Tour. The prize money is huge. They set an attendance record, Remo, 163,914 bass-loving fans in Nashville, Tennessee. And the pictures on the Bassmaster Twitter feed, just go to @Bassmaster, are amazing. There's Gus throwing up the big championship. He's got the World Cup style ticker tape on him. And a great picture down in the post below with the new attendance record. But there were some other pictures as well, because one of the guys that was in the crew with Gussie, I'm not sure whether he was on another competitor or was part of Gustafson's group, but none other than his fishing buddy, one Dustin Byfuglien, who has made his presence felt. There's Buff feeling like he won another Stanley Cup, standing behind Gussie with the big trophy.
Yeah, this is the highlight. So I know he'd mentioned to us when we originally met him that he had fished with Buff before. We know that Byfuglien loves fishing. He was on that fishing podcast earlier this year. But yeah, the pictures coming out of this, there's Dustin Byfuglien, part of the group, holding up the number one. And there was one other picture from Corey Johnson, the other Canadian in the field from Peterborough. I'll bring up the picture of the three of them. He posted on his own Instagram. So we love Buff sightings here. And seeing him at the Bassmaster Classic, pretty incredible.
Yeah, and as I said, we'll get Gussie on the program at some point to talk about the big win whenever he is available. I know there was probably a big celebration in Tennessee last night. I'm not sure where he's off to now, but yeah, there you have it. Corey Johnson, one of the other competitors. There's our guy Gussie in the middle with the trophy. And there's the legend himself, large and in charge, Big Buff, at the Bassmaster Classic celebration party.
It is actually Dustin Byfuglien's birthday today. Just turned 38. So happy birthday to Dustin Byfuglien. And what a way to celebrate than at the Bassmaster Classic. And I think Gussie he has had some success there in the river in Knoxville, pulling out some bass. And remember, we had the story earlier this year about guys putting weights in their fish. So I'm seeing a lot of comments in chat being, "Oh, got to X-ray those fish," and just stuff like that.
Put it this way, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. I would not at all be surprised if that happens. Think about this. He won $300,000 US for winning this tournament. There's so much on the line. That was in, I think, a little more of a smaller tour, a little more rinky-dink. But, the prize was $10,000. And $10,000 meant a lot to those people. This is the biggest prize in the sport as far as we know. So, anyways, just an absolutely awesome dude. They're partying up at Lake of the Woods and in Kenora. A lot of people from around here have crossed paths with Jeff, including us, and just can't say how pumped we are for him to get that big win. And we'll look forward to having him on the program coming up very, very soon. All right, let's get to the Coolbet lines. What do we have today in the National Hockey League? We have 6 games on the docket, starting with the Sabres Sabres hosting the Canadiens. Buffalo a -186 favorite. Massive game for the Florida Panthers. They are 3 points out after losing 3 straight. -151 favorites in Ottawa. The Devils and Islanders. This is my tie of the night, Remo. Regulation draw. Book it. Plus 325 on the tie if you'd like to jump on it. Devils are -129. Islanders are plus 110. Kraken at the Wild. Wild a -124 home favorite. Kraken. How about that Eli Tolvanen revenge game on Saturday, reminding the Predators about putting him on waivers with a couple goals?
Oh, baby. Yeah, the Predators took that first one of that back-to-back, and Seattle came back hard with number 2. We're kind of waiting for Nashville. They were playing really well, but they've got a lot of injuries, as I mentioned before. Yossi, Duchesne, traded away Niederreiter. They've got Saros. He can keep you in it, but can they do it for this extended period of time? Nashville did lose yesterday to Toronto, so we're kind of keeping our eye here in Nashville and Calgary. And I thought the Jets maybe had a shot at catching Seattle and Minnesota, as you said. We'll see how they look tonight here.
They added to that cushion a little bit, especially with that head-to-head win over Nashville the weekend. Colorado at the Ducks. Avalanche minus 260 favorites, and the Oilers minus 311 faves in Arizona against the Coyotes. Arizona, once again, 20-11-4 at home. They always win. They're always a big home underdog. Jump on those if you want. Oh, and there is an XFL game tonight. Monday Night Football, XFL style. DC Defenders, the Houston Roughnecks. Dusty and I are going head-to-head on this one. I got Houston on the road. I'll take the points. Check out today's Lock Shop if you want more on, of course, the match play, which was won by Sam Burns. A little bit of look ahead to the Masters. And speaking of Masters, we're going to try and cook up something fun for a Masters contest with a couple really cool prizes. So stay tuned to Winnipeg Sports Talk in the next few days, heading into next week, which, of course, is Masters Week. Great show today. Tomorrow, it's game day. Mike McIntyre is in San Jose. We'll look forward to catching up with Mike. We'll have more from the latest in the playoff push right now, particularly in the Western Conference. And Remo, the other thing that we're going to have to do, as I mentioned right off the top of the show, is get ready for Ice playoffs. Congratulations to the Ice. Back-to-back WHL regular season champions. And now it's time for some unfinished business when they get going with the playoffs beginning on Friday night at the Ice Cave against Medicine Hat.
Unfinished business. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what the Ice can do. Disappointing early end last year, but they're back, finishing first, and they've got so many great players on that team. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. One other note, before we go, was Lamar Jackson announcing that he had requested a trade from the Ravens at the beginning of the month, and I wonder what happens to him, and maybe does that explain why teams weren't interested in signing him? I don't know what to make of the situation. It seems crazy the Ravens wouldn't want to give the guy what he's worth, or I don't know.
There's not one team in the league that wants to give a fully guaranteed contract, just because Jimmy Haslam and those bozos in Cleveland did it for Deshaun Watson. And I'm not sure he gets it from anyone, a fully guaranteed deal.
It is crazy that they did give it to Deshaun Watson, who hadn't played for a while, and coming off those charges that were
and they gave it to him all in a signing bonus, so that when he missed his salary was $1 million.
Yeah.
So when he missed the 11 games, he wasn't losing any money. I mean, listen, Cleveland, I feel for their fans because they have incredibly rabid and supporting fans that have been treated to just decade after decade of losing. But the temptation of doing whatever you can do to be a winner is always there in pro sports. But they screwed themselves, and they really did screw all of the other teams by that move. And if you'll notice, no one else has gone that way. Lamar Jackson, without an agent, is trying to be the guy that gets that done. One of the most fascinating offseason stories that we've seen in years in and around the NFL. And we'll have more on that coming up a little later on this week. All right, we got to get these pods up, folks. Hope you had a great weekend. Thanks for being with us today. Hit that thumbs up on your way out if you haven't already, please. And make sure you've hit that red subscribe button for those of you with us on YouTube. And don't forget to check out and subscribe to the podcast. Search Winnipeg Sports Talk wherever you get your favorite pods. Huge thanks to the sponsors that joined us, that support us each and every day. And our guys, Sean Reynolds and Jeff Hamilton, a great weekend recap with a lot of interesting topics around the Winnipeg Jets as they take on the San Jose Sharks tomorrow. We'll be all over it. Join us live at 1 on YouTube. We will see you then. Have a great night, and thanks for hanging with us today.
Oh, my God! Oh! Shut it down! Let's go home!
Thanks for tuning in to Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast feed at winnipegsportstalk.com.